Welcome to the Worth Knowing live stream. I'm Matt Robeson, and I'll bet that sometime in the last year, or maybe lots of times, you've looked at a headline and said, this isn't normal. And of course, you're right. Not only does something feel off, something is off. Something has gone very, very awry. Of course, for people who are online and on the left, that's old hat. We agree that what felt broken about politics 10 or even 5 years ago has now metastasized into something malignant. But not everyone quite feels that way. Or if they do, they can't quite put their finger on why things have gone far beyond garden variety political dysfunction. And again, they definitely have. That's what we're going to show today. I want to be clear that Americans are sensing it. Even if the headlines are sliding past them, even if they never even see them, it's in the air, it's in the water. And I'm not just talking about the extra pollutants that Trump's EPA is allowing these days. Most of us, though, haven't put together the scale and the breathtaking scope of just how deep the rot goes. Now, you can see in polls that only 26% of Americans are satisfied with the way things are going in the United States. That's according to Gallup. But that's actually historically not that low. There have been plenty of times in the last 50 years where Americans have felt about the same or even worse, including much of the last 15 years, going back to the Obama years. People are really unhappy with President Donald Trump. His approval rating has collapsed among independents, with 70% now disapproving in the latest Yahoo YouGov survey. And even people who don't pay close attention to the news are picking up on the idea that something's wrong. People who consume little or no news favored Trump over Kamala Harris by almost 20 points a year and a half ago. Now they disapprove of Trump by a 13-point margin. But again, a lot of that is because the cost of living is so high, our problems with our healthcare and our job opportunities, and the fact that young Americans can't even begin to sniff the chance to buy a house. All of that's weighing on us. It's weighing on us so much that most of us don't really have time to think about the level of corruption and dysfunction that's allowing all of those problems to build and build month after month. That's why I think today's show, the exercise we're about to do, is so important. Because even though all of these signs show just how bad things have gotten, even though they're all in our face, they also tend to fall off of our mental radar, because the very nature of how much distress we're feeling day to day makes it hard to think about. If your house is rotting at the foundations, but your attic is on fire, you rush up to the attic with buckets. Of course you do. It makes sense. But if you do it long enough, you'll end up putting out fires until your house collapses from underneath. That's the danger that we face right now. So what we're going to do right now is look at the top 5 warning signs that something has gone very wrong in politics and in this particular government led by this particular president. And yes, I want to acknowledge that this is a deadly serious topic, and treating it with a top 5 countdown might seem a little flippant. But it's also a feature, not a bug, because if we do this as purely a doom and gloom exercise, then people won't want to touch it. They won't want to think about it. And the Trump people will just keep running their standard playbook of saying, everyone has Trump derangement syndrome. You don't want to worry about all this. How about buying a nice crypto meme of Trump coin instead, or something like that? So yeah, we're going to try and have a little bit of fun with this. And that's on purpose, because a little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. And believe me, America is sick and we need some medicine. The person who's been tracking all of this in a series that he calls Signs of the Fascist Apocalypse is my old online friend, Shane Almgren, author of the Trumpland Diary on Substack and the #1 chronicler of this Trump administration online. Shane, welcome back.
Matt, so good to be back with you. How are you, sir?
Well, that's sort of the problem here is I feel fine. I feel okay. I think the apocalypse is indeed happening around us, and it's not just TDS. It's not just my imagination. I think people who follow you, because you actually chronicle these things incident by incident, time by time, and you put the pattern together, I think we feel a legitimate level of alarm. And I think one of the values of what we're going to try and do here is we're going to underscore for people, you're not just imagining this, and you may have forgotten things that happened a few months ago, but let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. And it is damning. It is pretty damning. Do you enjoy doing this? Do you do this for fun, or do you do this because you're alarmed?
You know what? When I started doing it, it was there's always a sense, I have a comedy background. How do you take something awful and make it funny? Taking something boring and making it funny is one particular challenge. Can you make reading the phone book entertaining? Taking something that is just objectively horrifying and seeing, all right, how can we, how would Jon Stewart and the Daily Show folks or John Oliver, how would they tackle this? Um, it's disconcerting as an American citizen to go, I'm living under this. Uh, but it is entertaining and challenging as a daily exercise as a writer to go, how do we frame this? So there is, there is a dual uh, perspective to both of it. It's horrifying and fun.
Well, that's it's the end of the world as we know it. We feel fine.
As we know it, yeah.
So here we go. We're going to launch into this. I will say up front, we are, as far as YouTube is concerned, we're exclusively on the Blue Amp. And so I'm going to just go ahead and do a little ad right now. People can also find the rest of this kind of approach to taking a lighthearted, fun, engaging, like a sports show, like a matchup of PTI and the Daily Show kind of approach to the news and what is otherwise a stone cold bummer on my YouTube, worth knowing, Matt Robeson. All right, with that, here we go. I want to mention, we decided, and I actually polled this last week. I wanted to ask people, do you prefer top 5 or top 10? The vote was for top 5. But that means that some things had to get pushed off the list. So let's talk about your honorable mentions. What's on the cutting room floor? What didn't quite make it to the top 5 signs of the fascist apocalypse list for you?
Well, the 74 items that did not make it into the top. No, I had 4 categories that I had weighed putting in the top 5, and you could have made a strong case for any of them. One was just the corruption of the pay-to-pay pardons, where while out of one side of his mouth, everyone in the Trump regime is talking tough on crime. We want to get hardened criminals off the street. We want to crack down on fraud. And the number of fraudsters that he has pardoned, some of them even more than once. There was at least one person who had got pardoned of fraud, did more fraud, got pardoned again. And it's basically if you just go down to Mar-a-Lago and make a donation to a super PAC or something in Trump's name, he'll let you off. So that was one.
Who's the worst Trump pardon in your mind? I might put I'm going to mispronounce his name, Changpeng Zhao, the founder of Binance.
CZ is up there. I think you can make a 3-way tie between CZ. I don't remember the guy's name, but the founder of the Silk Road.
Ross Ulbricht.
Ulbricht, that's it. Yeah.
No one who speaks German could be bad.
That CZ Ulbricht, and then the Jan 6, the collective Jan 6 insurrectionist crowd.
Yeah, that's a big one. Juan Orlando Hernandez is coming in hot as a dark horse here. The former Honduran president sentenced to 45 years for acting as a drug kingpin, aiding in the trafficking of over 400 tons of cocaine to the U.S. That's more cocaine than even you and I did together in our younger days. And yet he was pardoned right before we took down Maduro for trafficking drugs, bringing in the drugs. Yes, he's a narco terrorist. Anyway, okay, sorry. So this is just one of your honorable mentions. What else have you got?
I had all the executive orders that he's done on anti-science things. You briefly touched on the EPA stuff that he's helping out his friends in the fossil fuel and the oil industry, but just declaring that the studies that found that science is just declaring that the data does not count. We cannot, we can't even consider it. Quickly moving through these, the law.
I'll just mention on that one, if I could editorialize for a second. I wrote an article in Newsweek and went on to my Substack a year ago with a colleague, a friend who's she's an economist at UMass, a brilliant professor, and we have a shared passion for the sneaky, most important thing that the federal government of the United States of America does or has ever done, which is create the modern world around us by investing in basic science. American taxpayer-funded scientific research and development literally created every invention that we're looking at, thinking about, interfacing over, everything. Just pause and look around whatever room or space is around you, and everything in it, the sneakers, the camera on your phone. I mean, we didn't invent the freaking sun, but we came darn close. We certainly invented the basic technology that went into solar cells. Everything about the modern world, most of our economy, is the grandchild of your grandparents' tax dollars that went through the federal government into basic science. And he has been freaking eviscerating it, and it is sneaky, sneaky important. Anyway, please go on.
My number 3 honorable mention was the lawfare on political opponents. And when you go down the list from, former FBI Director James Comey, where he is bound and determined to get them for something. And if somebody says there's no evidence, he'll replace them with somebody who says there is. And if they can't get a conviction there or a grand jury ruling, they'll drum up some more charges. Jerome Powell over at the Fed, the 6 lawmakers who made that video telling the troops they don't have to follow illegal orders. He launched an investigation into Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey over what was going on in Minneapolis. Patel firing the FBI agents who investigated Trump at Mar-a-Lago. Cassidy Hutchinson, who was a key witness for these are all just things that I had written down for 2026. It was going to be too daunting to go back any further than just the last 2.5 months. And then of all the ones, I don't know how this will tell you how bad the top 5 were. One of the ones that didn't make my top 5 was the concentration camps.
Oh, gosh. Wow.
So this is like, if you talk to your friends on the right, or they'll call you alarmist if you call the Trump regime fascist. And Hitler, he didn't kill 6 million Jews. There's no concept with them of like, Hitler wasn't doing the dastardly things from 1933 to 1941. But there was an 8-year period where, looking back, we have a whole bunch of red flags, and we didn't go right to the concentration camps. But so for them, they can't acknowledge the red flags leading up to it. Their hard line, you can't say it unless we have concentration camps. So Kristi Noem and the DHS buying up warehouses. I think DHS had acquired something like 23 different warehouses that were capable of housing 10,000 people, and they had to be outfitted with biohazard incinerators.
Oh my God.
AKA large ovens. So it's like, at what point?
Once again, the disclaimer that you have to chuckle about this because it's so far beyond the pale that otherwise you would just smack your head repeatedly into a stupor. I mean, it's unbelievable. By the way, I should also mention that honorable mentions, if the filter here is signs of the fascist apocalypse, and you're truly looking for signs that things have gotten fundamentally broken in our government because of this administration, and so you've got to drop things from the list. I mean, you're not even mentioning here the fact that actual fascism, like actual Nazism, has overtaken young Republicans, national Republicans group chats, like the multiple revelations of just how they talk when they're in private. It's really astounding. But okay, all right.
All right.
Those are the things that we didn't even have time to get into, and now we've gotten into them. So what we're going to do for the rest here is we're going to give your top 5. And I want to disclaim for people, and I'll put this back up on the screen, that all of this came from, you are doing this week in and week out. You're covering it on your Substack, Trumpland Diary. You can find it here. It's up on the screen. And what I asked you to do as an exercise is go back and connect the dots. Put them into categories of things that are truly alarming, that you've documented very carefully. So these are very real. They're very, very full of proof, and they're very, very important. And that was your filter, and this is your top 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Go. Let's go to number 5.
Sure. So the challenge of this was grouping them together. And when I had started the signs of the apocalypse, originally it was this week's sign. And then it was getting, I was real. Someone said, well, you've had 3 this week. I was like, all right, I guess we have to go to today's. So there's usually every day there's at least one today sign. But grouping these, one of the, so number 5 was the whitewashing of history. And obviously, when they came in last year with all the DEI stuff, everything from taking down military mentions of the Tuskegee Airmen to the Enola Gay airplane from, was it World War II, that the mention of that because the word gay was in the name. But again, this is confined to just things that have happened since January 1st of 2026. We're not going back in time.
What will they do to the music, to the music catalog of Marvin Gaye?
Oh goodness. Yeah, we could be here for 6 hours if we had to go line by line of all the stuff they did last year. But so Trump ordered the removal of an exhibit on slavery at Philadelphia's Independence National Historic Park. And according to the Interior Department, there were panels that had biographical details about the 9 people that were enslaved by George and Martha Washington, which is a thing that happened. And apparently what the Trump regime didn't like is that it was mentioned, not that it was condemned or that we said something about it is bad. We should feel bad about it ourselves. Nothing to do with critical race theory, just it was a thing that exists. So what they referenced was Trump's executive order called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which by restoring truth, they mean Xing out the things that make us uncomfortable. Basically, slavery makes us sad, and facts care about our feelings, so we're just going to get rid of it. Thankfully, the city of Philadelphia sued Doug Burgum, who is the Interior Secretary, and the acting National Park Service Director, Jessica Boron, to block that removal. So that's still winding through the courts, I believe. So that was one attempt to whitewash it. And then another one that stood out was the Trump ordered the removal of the word racist from the Medgar and Merle Evers Home National Monument, the visitor's brochure.
So you're not allowed to say the word racist when you're speaking of the murder of Medgar Evers? That's what you're, I didn't even know this one. Really?
So do you want to give them a brief history? You want me to tell it?
No, you tell it. You tell it. This is astonishing to me. Tell me.
All right. So Medgar and Merle Evers, they're big pioneering civil rights leaders in Mississippi in the 50s and 60s. Medgar was assassinated. This would have been 62, 63, I think, by Byron de la Becque, who was a member of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. He ambushed Medgar in his own driveway and shot him in the back. And then it took 3 separate trials, and it was over a period of like 3 decades to finally secure a conviction. I think it was, again, he was murdered in 63. It was like 90, early mid 90s, 93, 94. On the 3rd trial, they finally convicted him. But because they were such civil rights pioneers, their home was turned into a monument. It was a national monument. And if you visited the monument, you could pick up a brochure, and your very, very delicate sensibilities would be assaulted with a description of Beck calling him a member of the racist and segregationist White Citizens Council. And they decided you can't call him that. You could acknowledge that he killed him, but you couldn't say it was part of a racist organization. And again, this was part of Trump's restoring truth and sanity to American history, which,
well, it's a good thing. This goes right of a piece with, we've got to protect the white South Africans who are being oppressed and murdered in faked viral AI driven videos. And we have to let them in. All other immigrants can fuck off, but the white South Africans, if we know anything about history, they are deeply, deeply oppressed. And, TikTok tells us so. So Wow. That is a strong initial entry. I see we have some trolls here in the comments who are trying to engage with us by saying that civil rights was bad. And look, I'm so glad you are making that comment and revealing yourself, because that does seem to be
Is the ghost of Charlie Kirk in the room with you?
Oh, yes. Out, spirit. Reveal yourself. Yes, I find this deeply troubling. Yes, and Lefty Gramps is right. Trump did take some lessons from good old George Orwell. I mean, look, I think that there's a lot to this, and I do hear the criticism from the troll here, which is like, oh, well, like, it seems kind of anodyne to say that you're whitewashing history, but I think what Lefty Gramps is pointing out is correct, right? Is that the power to control our memories and to retcon them continuously into oblivion is a deep fascist power. This is what Orwell was talking about. This is what Winston Smith in the novel 1984, this was his job, was to rewrite history, to take archival versions of the newspaper and to rewrite them and to get rid of anything that ran against the party line, and to, yes, thank you, Lefty, to memory hole it, literally throw the old stuff down the memory hole where it would be incinerated. And, you can talk about relatively long ago history, like the murder of Medgar Evers, or you could talk about the continuous attempt to revisit the 2020 election and to raid the Georgia elections office and to remove ballots and to say, no, there really was some rigging, or to pardon the January 6th protesters and to say, well, they were really just peaceful protesters engaged in a normal tourist visit. It all goes of a piece with your exercise here, which is to go through the signs of the fascist apocalypse. Speaking of going through the signs of the fascist apocalypse, shall we go to number 4?
Yeah, and that's a perfect tie-in, the segue there, because number 4 was the media suppression. So you rewrite the history books, and then you control the narrative that people are getting in real time. And Trump's line about fake news goes back to the early 80s when he learned that from Roy Cohn. But just some examples that we've got. Again, this is just 2026. This is from January 1st. Let's go down the list here. So
I think the original sin is the ABC News, the lawsuit against Stephanopoulos, in my mind. I think, and that settlement, I think that was like the crack in the levee. But maybe you want to go to something else.
Well, I've got 7 or 8 line items here that were just in the last couple months. So one, Gavin Newsom being denied entry at the World Economic Forum in Davos, being told the U.S. delegates there wouldn't let him in because he was supposed to give a speech on the world stage. Obviously, there was the FBI raid. This might have been before the first of the year, but it had to do with the Pentagon forcing the reporters to sign a pledge that they would not report on anything that wasn't approved by the Trump regime or the Pentagon itself. And Washington Post reporter Hannah Natanson, I think is how you pronounce her name. Her home was raided. All her electronics were seized. She had written something that had, I don't remember if she had failed to sign the pledge and then reported something, or if she had signed it and didn't get clearance. There was the arrest of Don Lemon when obviously he had followed the protesters into the church in Minneapolis. They were disrupting a church service, and he had just gone in to document it, and they charged him with the crime, even though he was just sort of performing journalism. There was the FCC case where Stephen Colbert had been instructed by the attorneys that Brendan Carr had reached out to them and said James Tallarico, this was the night before or 2 nights before the election down in Texas, that it was going to be problematic if Tallarico came on and none of his opponents or challengers were on. And so they didn't air the segment. And Stephen Colbert was instructed that he couldn't discuss not being able to air the segment, and did it anyways. They put Tallarico's segment on YouTube, I believe, and it blew up. It got like 5 or 6 times the rating as a normal Colbert episode. There was Trump demanding Netflix fire Susan Rice, who's one of the board members for, oh gosh, this was, there are so many stories in these signs of the fascist apocalypse where Trump gets like the telephone gang, he gets like third or fourth hand information, and the information is morphed, and he's responding to something that is like the third hand account. Let me see real quickly.
Oh yeah,
If
this
I
is
can,
like the best example of this is they're eating the pets, they're eating
yes,
the dogs. Yeah, right, exactly. I of all of these, boy, ABC I think was sort of the test case. Obviously, the Brendan Carr thing has just been revived yet again with this, threat about licenses for any media that don't report on the war with Iran exactly the way the administration wants them to. We just did a deep dive segment on this where my Republican co-host of the Political Rehab Show over on the Worth Knowing, Matt Robeson, Worth Knowing YouTube channel, we do this show, Political Rehab, and my Republican counterpart, who is an active Republican political consultant, did a deep dive video segment. You can find it on YouTube, where he completely blasted and took this apart. It was pretty great. And it's just completely without foundation in the Constitution or law, and completely un-American and not at all conservative, which is, I guess, what the Trump administration claims to be. But whatever. Anyway, I filibustered there. You were looking something up.
yeah, I found it. So Susan Rice, this is she's on the board at Netflix. She had gone on the Preet Bharara's podcast, and she was asked about accountability in the midterms. And I've got the quote here because to see how far from where it went from here to where Trump got, it needs to be read verbatim. She was asked about accountability for corporations that had skirted regulations under the Trump administration. And Susan Rice said, if these corporations think that the Democrats, when they come back in power, are going to, play by the old rules and say, oh, never mind, we'll forgive you for all the people you fired and all the policies and principles you violated, all the laws you skirted, I think they've got another thing coming, which is it's fairly innocuous. Just there's going to be at some point accountability in the future. Professional crazy person Laura Loomer then took to Twitter X, and she was not quoting Rice directly. She was attributing a whole bunch of words to her and somehow found herself off on a tangent about Michelle Obama. I don't know how the Obamas got dragged into it, but Laura Loomer called Michelle an anti-white racist. Susan Rice hadn't said anything about the Obamas, hadn't said anything about racism. She was talking about corporate responsibility, but because Laura Loomer has the ear of the president, Trump read it, didn't pay a whole lot of attention, and thought Loomer was calling out Susan Rice for being a racist. And so Trump tweets out, Netflix should fire racist Trump deranged Susan Rice immediately or pay the consequences. She's got no talent or skill, purely a political hack. Her power is gone and will never be back. How much is she being paid and for what? Thank you for your attention to this matter. So Grandpapa has left the reservation. He's off the rails.
Well, I just want to jump in and correct something that you said in there. Laura Loomer is a professional crazy person, but it's also her pastime. It's sort of her passion in life. And I think we should recognize that, right? Like, as Cynthia Rice says here, she's been committed twice by her family to a mental hospital. And I think that, it's that old thing. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So I don't think we can fully say that it's her profession. I think it's more just what she is.
That's fair. She's a hobbyist, which means she never has to retire. If she does, she'll just continue doing the crazy for free. So
there you go. I don't know how she gets paid for any of this, but that's another story. All right. So media suppression is number 4 on the signs of the fascist apocalypse. Shall we go to number 3? This is your number 3 rated sign of the fascist apocalypse, which is really, you're putting them all in buckets here. So this is a bucket full of fascist slop here.
Yeah, number 3 was the ICE Gestapo tactics. And so just again, in the last 2.5 months of 2026, we have leaked memos and a whistleblower showing off memos that authorize ICE agents to break into homes without judicial warrants. Even though their own training manual says this is unconstitutional, there was memos going around internally that they can go ahead and do it. There was, thank gosh for TikTok, in the age of cameras, as annoying as they can be sometimes at concerts, if they're standing in front of you, everybody is potentially an investigative reporter when they're on the sidewalk or in the street with their camera. So one ICE agent caught on video saying, if you raise your voice, I'll erase your voice. To people that he was asking them why they were protesting, and they were getting into a back and forth, and the ICE officer basically threatened to arrest him just for talking louder. As of, I believe it was January 29th, it was right at the end of January, ICE had been shown in violation of nearly 100 court orders in just the month of January. So they were averaging about 3 court-ordered violations per day. Following the death of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, the feds blocked local officials from investigating or accessing any evidence for what ICE had done. Again, just skirting accountability. Yesterday, with ICE deployed to the airports for reasons that don't seem to have anything to do with speeding up the lines, Trump tweeted out that ICE should continue to wear masks, just not at the airport. And then there was, anytime we talk about the Trump regime, it's always the cruelty is the point. There was one I wanted to give a little bit more information on because it was ICE cruelty. And it was the story from last month about the refugee from Myanmar or Burma, the 56-year-old blind guy who was found dead in the snow. And this story, it's just heartbreaking. Your listeners should probably just... So this guy is 56 years old. He was fully blind in one eye, mostly blind in another, and he used a walking stick. He actually used a curtain rod for a walking stick, but he couldn't move without a walking stick. But he had got arrested last February. He had got lost in the neighborhood and ended up on some lady's porch. And she called the cops. The cops showed up. They're yelling at him to put down his weapon. Well, he doesn't speak English, and they ended up tasering him and taking him into custody. His family decided not to bail him out of jail because they were afraid he would get detained by ICE, even though he was in the country legally. So he sat in the county jail for almost a year until his attorney could reach a plea deal where he would plead guilty to trespassing and possession of a weapon. Again, he was on somebody's porch because he was lost, and the weapon was his walking stick. But if he pled guilty to that, they would let him out without handing him over to the ICE facility. So he gets out of jail. Border Patrol picks him up, but instead of taking him to his home, they release him at night at like 5 miles from his house in Buffalo, New York, where I don't know what the temperature was below zero, but they dropped him off without his walking stick at night, 5 miles from a home. They didn't notify his family or his attorney where they had dropped him. And the only shoes he had were the orange booties, like the kind of those paper cloth issued prison shoes. So he was just missing for several days and was found dead outside the Buffalo Sabres hockey arena 3 days later. And it's just, he shouldn't have been there in the first place, but it's almost, I struggle to find any words to describe the malice and the cruelty. Like, that wasn't a series of unfortunate events. That was planned cruelty. Um, to an immigrant of color who couldn't see, couldn't speak the language, just imagining the confusion and the terror that they put him through. It breaks your heart. It's maddening. It's infuriating.
And when people begin to notice the extended wait times at airports in the coming months, and they have begun to creep up significantly because there are shortages of TSA employees, because they haven't been paid, because the Department of Homeland Security has not been funded. There's a standoff in Congress because Democrats have demanded significant, serious reforms to the way ICE does business. They have not, as political opponents would like to surely claim, they have not said, we need to abolish ICE. That's not what congressional Democrats are saying. They're simply saying, let's stop the worst of this untrained, heavily armed paramilitary goon squad that inflicts terror and death on American citizens and on immigrants. Let's rein them in. Let's stop this. I hope people will bear in mind that story that you just told and recognize that, yes, you actually, if you want to stop the government from doing terrible things in your name, because we are a democracy nominally still, and these people do represent us, the government does work for us, we shouldn't be afraid of them. Government should be afraid of their people. That's straight from V for Vendetta. I hope people remember this story that you just told. This is what we're trying to stop, this kind of cruelty and illegality and corruption. And yes, I don't think it's going too far to say fascism. With that, should we get to number 2?
Well, let me add one more in. It wasn't from this year. It's been an ongoing thing, but it's in a similar vein, just to show how racist and how upside down things have gotten. When they started doing the big ICE raids last year, there were a number of members of the Navajo Nation in Arizona that had got swept up and detained until they were released. And then I believe there were some other Native Americans in Ohio. I don't know if it was Iowa, but the president of the Navajo Nation issued a statement telling all the members to start carrying their papers, which that phrase, show me your papers. The idea of Native Americans, the ones that were here first, being forced to carry papers or being told to carry papers to protect them from getting deported. And at the time, CCOT in El Salvador was the thing that everyone was really afraid of. The idea that our white nationalist Aryan nation brotherhood might deport Native Americans for not having papers to El Salvador. I mean, that's where we are.
Build on that point. Let me just build on that point, because we have a semi-trollish comment here that I'm going to go ahead and splash up and respond to, because I like to address the weak ass arguments from the other side. Stephanie Bennett 9722, who really is a real human, I guess, says, none of you have really been through anything that would even show you what words like fascism and Gestapo even mean. Well, Stephanie, that is true. I'm very fortunate to live in the United States of America, where I have not had to go through the kinds of experiences that would show me personally what words like fascism and Gestapo even mean. The reason that I'm here is that all my grandparents had to flee from places where they very much experienced what the words fascism and Gestapo mean. My grandmother, who made her way on a train alone across all of Europe from what was at the time a part of Belarus, and really she thought of as Russia. It's just fucking Russia, okay? She fled from Cossacks and raids and pogroms, and her father tried to get her to what at the time was Palestine. They ended up landing in New York. Another grandmother, her family chased out of Lithuania. Another branch of the family chased out of Lithuania. So, yes, I take your point, Stephanie. You're right. I don't personally experience anything like that anymore because that's not supposed to happen here. And that's exactly what's happening when ICE agents, armed to the teeth in ways that you would think that they're trying to take down Sadr City in Iraq, are demanding people's papers on the street, and especially Native Americans. Native Americans, it's right there in the name because they look vaguely Latino. All right. On that, shall we move to number 2?
Let's go to number 2. Number 2, this is our cult leader worship. And I did make a graphic for this. Trump put his face up on the Department of Justice building. I think it was early last month. And I just wanted to draw a distinction because it was the third building. So his banner is hanging from the Department of Agriculture building, the Department of Labor building, and now the Department of Justice building. I don't know how you can get further from saying nobody is above the law. Justice is blind. There's no entanglement between the president and the DOJ than hanging your picture outside their building. And I was looking. Trump is the first president in American history to insist on stuff like this, and it's something straight out of the authoritarian playbook. It's not necessarily fascist. Fascist is far right. Obviously, Mao and the Chinese communists, they're on the far left, but it is authoritarian, certainly, tendency to venerate the cult figure, the cult leader. But in addition to his face appearing everywhere, I just want to go down the list. When you hear them all in a row, it's perplexing how much Trump, the self-veneration. So you've got the 3 different buildings. His face is obviously on the new National Parks Pass. And when those were issued, some protesters had tried to, protest it by putting stickers over the face. And so they added a disclaimer to the Parks Pass that stickers could be considered defacing the pass. And so if you showed up with a sticker over Trump's face, you could either be denied entry or charged the normal day rate, even though you already had the national pass. So even though there is a policy against presidents appearing on coins until at least after they leave office, I don't remember if it was after death or after they leave office. So in January, they voted to allow Trump to appear on a $1 coin for the 250th anniversary commemoration. And the Fine Arts Commission, the ones that he appointed to approve his ballroom, they also voted to mint a gold commemorative coin with the instructions to make it as large as possible. So they were aiming for 3 inches, which is, for those of you that need a visual reference, it's literally the exact size of a hockey puck. So a gold Trump coin and a 250th anniversary $1 gold coin. Things he slapped his name on was the Kennedy Center. Obviously, now it's the Trump Kennedy Center, which legally he can't do. That's a Congress job. The Institute of Peace. Remember, his goons took over that. They stormed in, and then they tried to steal a $500 million building. But Trump has renamed that the Trump Institute of Peace. He has renamed a brand new class, or named a new class of battleships.
Can I just point one quick thing out about the Trump Institute of Peace? I think you actually pointed this out on your Substack as well. He did a military style takeover using Doge of that building.
Yes.
So his board of peace is housed in a forcibly occupied building. We fought a little war over the quartering of troops involuntarily in American territory, and here we are.
Uh, we have the Trump class battleships. We've got the Trump accounts, which is for kids born between 2025 and 2028. The government will fund $1,000 investment account. The Trump RX, which is the website where you can get discounted prescriptions, which are mostly drugs that are off the market or outdated or whatever.
Oh my gosh. I just have to quickly mention, if people are interested in the Trump accounts, Ann Kim, who is the number 2 editor at Washington Monthly, old friend of mine from Capitol Hill, another Capitol Hill legislative person, policy person, chief of staff like me. She was on this show. She did a marvelous deconstruction, absolute takedown of what a bullshit setup this is for people who already don't need the money. It's basically only accessible by people who don't need the money. And Trump RX, guess what? I covered that one on my That's Bullshit series, which you can find up on the Worth Knowing YouTube. And I did an entire deconstruction of this. It is essentially a worse version of Good RX. It's just letting you know what drug companies, what discounts they're already offering. And in most cases, they're offering discounts on drugs that are old and way outside their patent protection limit. And it's just a way of squeezing the last few dollars out of obsolete drugs where there is a cheaper generic. So it is also, believe it or not, a scam.
And speaking of scams, and speaking of renaming things, so while there is still legislation pending to rename Dulles International Airport after Trump, Palm Beach has decided to rename the Palm Beach International Airport after Trump. And as that decision was being made, or in the immediate, while it was being made, the Trump organization took out copyrights for different ways you could use the phrase. It was like the DJT International Airport, Trump International, the Donald J. Trump, to get licensing fees on the airport being named after him. So any airport that names it after him, he will get paid for that. And and then of course there's I don't know if it's stalled or what, but semi-professional, or we could, I guess, amateur crazy person, Anna Paulina Luna, had introduced legislation to add Trump to Mount Rushmore as the fifth face there. But so those are your examples of just the cult figure worship, names, visage appearing anywhere and everywhere.
I know we have to move on. We've got another one. This one is, I just did a That's Bullshit segment about this. I think the outward manifestations of cult leader worship are creepy. You know, like, again, I'm just going to bring up this image one more time. Like, you know, this stuff, it just, you don't really, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Like, you don't need to describe it. So it's creepy. The parallels are obvious, but I think it's the behavior modification. I think it's the Trump mind virus that really bothers me about the cult leader worship. It's not that people just do, this is something that, again, I pointed out in my That's Bullshit video, that the way people in Trump's orbit behave is like the intended, betrothed, arranged bride in Coming to America. What do you like? Whatever you like. What kind of music do you listen to? Whatever kind of music you listen to. Bark like a dog. Ruff, ruff. It's not just that it's like that. It's that what Trump demands of people is, show me a core belief of yours. Show me something that is an absolute non-negotiable plank of your soul. I'm going to demand that. This is truly Antichrist level stuff. God demanded of Abraham, sacrifice your son Isaac. This is the biblical equivalent. He looks for something that you deeply believe in, down to your guts. And he says, give that up, sacrifice that. in the case of Tulsi Gabbard, she ran for president on one issue. Just cast your mind back. She said regime change war so often it sounded like the internal bot in her brain was broken. Just like Marco Rubio melted down on stage and couldn't get off his talking points when Chris Christie pushed him, it was the same thing with Gabbard. She was broken. Regime change war. And plenty about Iran. And now last week, she had to do not just the Trump walk of shame, but this public immolation of everything that she previously stood for. Ditto J.D. Vance, ditto Lindsey Graham, ditto Marco Rubio, and ditto everyone who's in the MAGA movement. I know there's been some criticism of that poll that came out and showed that 100% of self-identified MAGA voters support the war with Iran. I mean, it is tautological in a way, because if you are a self-identified MAGA person, then by definition, you support the things that Trump does. But it still, I think, holds up with my point, which is one of the foundational principles of America First, of Trump's whole reason for running for president, is opposition to getting engaged in wars in the Middle East. And here he is, not just reversing himself and demanding that his followers reverse themselves, but demanding that the thing that they thought was central to their belief get lit on fire. That, I think, is the hallmark of a cult. And so putting his face up on government buildings, especially the Department of Justice, is a true sign of the fascist apocalypse. But people's behavior goes right along with that. All right, that was a long soliloquy. I got to see your number one. What, Shane, is your number one?
So my number one kind of ties all this together, because in Trump's first year, his policies have been historically unpopular. He's the most unpopular president in the history of polling. And they can't run on policies. They understand that people hate the policies. Even the 100% MAGA enthusiasts, they only represent like a third of the country. Trump was able to get a lot of voters in 2024 by telling a lot of lies. And then people realized real quick, oh, he's lying. Yeah, we don't like this. Prices are going up. Or now we're in a new war. All the ICE Gestapo stuff does not really resonate with us. It's not who we see ourselves. So knowing that they cannot, or they don't have the policies to win elections, they've gone to voter suppression. And they've done it cloaked under the guise of election integrity. And again, we've got some doublespeak here, and I want to break out some numbers, because one of the things that everybody has heard is that the Democrats opened up the borders to bring people here to help illegals. We're going to give them subsidies so that they will vote Democrat. And so there's this urban legend, this urban myth, this boogeyman that conservatives love to wax on about. And that is the myth of the immigrant voter voting for Democrats. So there are two organizations, or two think tanks, that keep stats on this. It's the Cato Institute, which is kind of libertarian leaning, and the Heritage Foundation, which is obviously the architect of Project 2025. They're about as conservative as you can get. They keep data on voter fraud. So I want to just let your listeners know this. Going back into the early 80s, the Heritage, there have been about 3 billion total ballots cast in America, from local to national elections, going back to the early 80s. 3 billion votes. The Heritage Foundation has found 1,546 total instances of voter fraud. So of those 1,546, 68 of them involve non-citizens, which is a fraud rate of 0.00000002%. Or in positive terms, that means our elections are 99.9999998% fraud-free. So adopting the SAVE Act is very much a solution in search of a problem. The data does not bear out that there is anything that needs to be addressed. And so we go, well, what is the SAVE Act? It's basically it requires a national identification in order to vote. I said, what's the problem with that? Well, elections are left up to the states, and states can regulate. And previously, if you wanted to register, there's any number of ways that you can identify yourself, from a driver's license to a gun carry permit to a hunting and fishing license. But the SAVE Act would say that the only two acceptable forms are either a passport or a birth certificate. Both of them are problematic because only half of Americans currently have passports. They're not cheap or easy to get. They cost $165, 4 to 6 weeks, usually on average. And then birth certificates are problematic for anybody who's had a name change and whose current ID does not match their birth certificate, which is going to be one particular gender, which is women, who tend to lean Democratic. And gosh, if you go, I don't know how closely you follow Pete Hegseth's pastor, his spiritual advisor. He's the guy that doesn't think women should be allowed to vote. Just comes right flat out and said women do not deserve, they're not mentally capable of voting. So there is a very fringe movement to strip women of the right to vote, but making it more difficult for them, for people who inherently lean Democratic. It's estimated that, I don't know, something like 15% of women don't have any access to a birth certificate, couldn't come up with one if they wanted to. Either they're, for reasons, their hospital is no longer in existence, or it's, I don't know all the reasons that they couldn't do it. But anyways, an undue burden on people, which is meant to suppress voters. It's not meant to crack down on illegals voting, because illegals don't vote. It's meant to suppress voters because they cannot win on policy. So that is my number one, because the vote is the foundational bedrock of our democracy. And if people either can't or won't, I'm not even going to get into ICE being deployed to voting stations or seizing ballots or anything like that. Just trying to disenfranchise, make it difficult for legal votes to be cast, I see as the number one sign of the fascist apocalypse.
I want to just look, I'm nervous about hitting people with too many numbers. There's a problem with that.
Nerd alert! It was my understanding that there would be no math.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
Perfect.
But that said, I also have written about this. I wrote a long article in Newsweek about it 4 weeks ago. I featured that on my Substack, Substack.com. I did give some further numbers about this. I did cite that Heritage Foundation study, which found that only 10 cases involving in-person impersonation fraud and 41 cases involving non-citizens registering, voting, or attempting to vote were found out of billions of votes cast. The most comprehensive review of non-citizen voting ever done looked at a sample of 23.5 million votes in areas with high immigrant populations and found 30 suspected cases. That's 0.00001%. You're 5 times more likely to be struck by lightning or attacked by a shark than to ever find a fraudulent vote in America from a non-citizen. They do not change elections. Can you find one? Sure. You could find me a purple leaf in a forest full of green, and it would tell you absolutely nothing. And there has never been an instance of illegal non-citizen voting changing any election or even making a whisper of an imprint on an election. This is obviously a phantom problem. Now, I happen to be unpopular in the Democratic Party for believing that we should have cut a deal on this, on voter ID, years ago. when we held the power in Washington, because this was like such an obvious called shot. I've been dealing with this as a congressional and state legislative staffer for 20 years. I literally, since I started working in Congress in the year 2001, I've been dealing with this issue. We've known that they were going to come again and again back to this well. And there are versions of voter ID. I mean, voter ID exists in the majority of states. It's just a question of whether it's an impossible version meant to fuck up people's access to voting, or whether it's a reasonable version that includes relatively accessible standards and gives some government support for people being able to access critical documents. So there's a version of this that you can do that does not suppress the vote and answers the legitimate concerns of the few Republicans who are not doing this cynically, but genuinely believe that there's an issue of principle involved here, which I can understand and agree with, that you should have identification to be able to exercise your right to vote. I can get my head around that because you need identification in order to exercise your other constitutional rights. So I could be kind of on board with that, right? We require licenses for firearms. So sure, I understand the principle. I can get on board with it, but you can't do it by disenfranchising 20 million American citizens. That's obviously wrong. And so, yes, this is clear and abundant fascism. It is unadulterated, straight from the fire hose, skip the water fountain fascism. Absolutely a very worthy top choice. I know we're bleeding over the top of the hour. Anything in here or not in here that we didn't get to that you think people really need to just notice, just pay attention to when they're thinking about this case?
The voting case, or
overall
fascism in general?
In all five of what we've gone through here.
I think you touched on such a great topic when you mentioned Trump demanding the thing about you that you are willing to articulate is the thing that defines you. You mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. I think about RFK posing with his McDonald's cheeseburger on the plane with a look of disgust. But especially with the Iran war stuff going on and how you hear, I mean, forget changing your mind from one day to the next. Trump will have 3 different points of view in the course of a 5-minute conversation. Asking people to really evaluate, all right, last year you voted for him to keep us out of any wars. You said that Kamala was going to get us into a war in Iran, and that's why we should vote against her. What was it that made you now support Trump doing this? But try to be aware of how many different times Trump changes the talking point. He changes the narrative. And it's not like wavering just a little bit like this. It's like here to here. It's 180s. And if you sit there and find yourself nodding along to whatever it is he's saying, you don't have any principles of your own. That's how you know you're in a cult, because he's dictating your ideas for you. And your job is just to sit there and nod. So that's, one of the questions my great teachers in high school used to ask was, how was it that Hitler was able to happen? What was going on in Germany in the 30s that allowed Hitler to get to the point where they were past the point of no return? And I'd say, you look at look in the mirror. It's that reluctance to hold him accountable, to say he's doing anything wrong, and to let him dictate what your opinions are, instead of you dictating the rightness or wrongness of his actions based on your principles and convictions. That's your homework assignment.
I think that's also a great way to leave it, because there's been a very active exchange going on in the chats that I've decided to leave alone and let exist in the chats. And there's a lot of back and forth. And look, if you're unconvinced by all of this, I understand. And I know there are people who are so busily engaged in trash talking here right now that they're not really fully paying attention to this. But I'd ask you to, because there's a reason that, as I said at the top, 70% of independent voters now disapprove of Trump. There's a reason that even people who don't pay a lot of attention to the news or zero attention to the news now disapprove of Donald Trump. And when you really think about the very factually proven, deeply, and that's the value of this whole exercise. This, like I said at the top, this is why we do this. When you think about the pattern of everything that has been laid out here, and if you don't believe it, you can research it for yourself, or better yet, just subscribe. You put all your receipts in. So just subscribe to Shane. Like go check out Trumpland Diary, and you'll see it week in and week out laid out. And it fits into this larger pattern of, yes, they are trying to, in ways that are deeply un-American, grab a hold of power that we never believed that a presidential administration or a government should have. And yes, so the earlier exchange with the viewer who said, well, you don't really know what fascism and gestapo mean. I would submit that we do. We know very, very well. And we're trying to make sure that the echoes of it that are already happening here, and more than the echoes that are happening here, stop happening. And I hope that's something that people can agree on, even if, as it seems in the chats, they can't agree on anything else. All right. With that, the Substack is the Trumpland Diary. People can find it anywhere on the internet. It's called Google, people. Super useful. It's a great way to find everything that you're doing. And of course, you can find what I'm doing. The easiest hub for everything I'm working on is on worthknowing.substack.com. It's my writing, my work for Newsweek, my work directly on Substack, and my video stuff is often linked there. But I also deeply appreciate people subscribing directly on YouTube. Worth Knowing, Matt Robeson, and you will find it all there. Shane, thanks again for running down all of this with us.
Of course, my pleasure. Always great to talk to you, sir.
All right. For everyone else out there, as you wind down your flame wars, stay safe. Be well. We will see you. We have a fascinating episode coming up next week. 2 different guests, 2 different segments, a former congressman. We're doing AI. We're going deep into a database that was set up that reveals all of the hidden corrupt bargains going on in the Trump administration. It is an absolute not to be missed. So we'll see you next week, 2 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, stay safe, be well,